Hello and welcome everybody. Some of my students asked me to create a video explaining how I started programming. So here it is. So I started programming at 11 years old when I was working on creating private servers for a game I played at the time. That game was called RuneScape. Creating private servers for games is illegal. I didn't know that at 11 years old. The reason it's illegal is because although the server might be completely written by you from scratch, you're distributing their client, which obviously infringes their intellectual property. So that's how I started programming. I started that at 11 years old, working on private servers for that game. So I actually did a little bit of JavaScript when I was 10, actually. But that doesn't count because I was just copy and pasting things. I didn't know what I was doing. So that doesn't count. I moved from learning Java to .NET at around 13 years of age. So I was learning things like Visual Basic, okay? Visual Basic .NET, not Visual Basic, the older version, the .NET version. And I created a few forms, a few little applications. I made a web browser that I think I called it Demon Browser or something like that. Anyway, people actually downloaded it and enjoyed it. That was a web browser. It wasn't very difficult to make because obviously those of you that are familiar with .NET, you've probably heard of the browse plugin that comes with .NET. So, I was using that. I'm not sure if they still have that plugin now. They probably do. I haven't used .NET in a long time. But at the age of 14, this is where things start getting interesting. Because when I was 14 years old, I started learning PHP, okay? I started learning PHP and I hacked my score with a SQL injection attack, stole the whole database that I put on a disk and put in my safe. So I was 14 when I did that. That was very interesting that the school could have so little security with these so-called experts writing this code. So that was quite worrying. To make things worse, I found out that every school in my country had a similar system. Most of the schools, not every school, most of them. And yeah, that was quite concerning, you know what I mean? I wrote to the school anonymously and I told them everything. And they didn't do anything about it for 2 years. So, not good. So at age 14, I also learned how to create C# applications, okay? So I created some chroma key software. Now, for those of you that don't know what chroma key is, it's basically when you select a green screen or something and replace the background, okay? So that's what that is. And I actually started selling that on eBay for 99 pence a copy. Don't get me wrong, this was very basic software. It wasn't good, okay? So that's why it was cheap. And that made me a couple £100 a year for a while. Well, for the first year. There were a lot of complaints though. I mean, it was basic software, I was 14. But no, there were good reviews as well. Good value for the money. I mean, it's 99 pence, you know what I mean? You get what you pay for. But no, that was very interesting because it was the first time I was making money from my work. So yeah, when I was around 16, 17, I started getting more into embedded development, okay? And I created a game similar to Bop It. You've probably heard of Bop It. It's a British game. You smack it when it makes a noise. It'll go, and stuff like that. Anyway, my version was there's this light that goes around like this, and you have to press it as soon as the light hits a certain place. And I built this using the PIC16F628A microcontroller. Now, at the time, I was the first time learning about firmware and stuff like that. This was an incredible experience for me because for the first time ever, I was writing assembly language. And that taught me how machines work. Just by working with little microcontrollers like that, I actually learned how machines work. So around this time, I also created my first x86 bootloader, okay? So this was a very simple bootloader. It just loaded a couple sectors from the disk, displayed hello world, stuff like that, little things. And for a long time when I was learning assembly language, I used to get very confused with how come when I write a label, it starts to get executed if I don't put a jump or something to stop that happening. Because in my mind, I used to think labels were variables. Seems crazy to think about that now. But that's how I was thinking back then. And it took me a while to really learn assembly language. And that's mainly why I teach these things today, because I want to make it easier for everyone else. It's very difficult for me to learn that, especially when I was learning it. It was harder to learn these things back then. So at age 17, I also bought a Z80. Okay, and I played around with that in the circuit. To be honest, I didn't do as much as I wanted to with that. I think I got an increment in the program counter and I ditched it. I don't know why. I should definitely go back to that at some point. So at 17, I also got my first programming job. Okay, I started developing applications in WordPress, like plugins, I should say, plugins, and modifying WordPress themes for a company. Now, one of the things they did is they installed a file upload plugin on their client's website. Now, the problem was this upload plugin, it had vulnerabilities, right? It had serious vulnerabilities. You could specify the file name on the client when you upload the file. So as you can imagine, that's incredibly dangerous. And, I told them that we need to fix this, and I fixed it and got it uploaded. Because of my experience with hacking before that time, I was good at finding these things. I knew what to look for. I knew how to exploit systems, and I basically saved them a lawsuit. So at age 18, I started my bachelor's degree, right? Well, my foundation degree. I went into university with no qualifications. I failed high school because I never liked it. It was terrible. Anyway, I showed my kernel to a nice woman called Catherine, my operating system kernel that I made years before. It was a very basic kernel. After the bootloader, I wrote a little basic kernel that I didn't mention. And it was a very 16-bit kernel, real mode, very basic thing. Anyway, I showed her that, and she took a chance on me, and I got into the foundation degree with very low grades from high school. GCSE D is what I got, which is maximum highest grade I had in high school. GCSE D, very basic. Hated school, Anyway, I got into university, passed the foundation, aced the bachelor degree, came out with a first class bachelor's. So I'll talk about that now. So in my bachelor's degree, it wasn't too difficult, to be honest, because I already had experience before I started. The final year was slightly challenging on the AI. We did a bit of artificial intelligence. That was the only really challenge I found. So in my bachelor's, I created a cube. We could make projects and stuff at one point in the bachelor's degree. I chose to make a cube that could control your house appliances, a little like Alexa today. Okay, before Alexa though existed. Anyway, this cube, you would turn it and it would turn off your lights. Okay, it would turn off appliances, plug sockets. It would turn them all off, turn them on. So how it would work is it would be connected to the AC current, which was a really stupid thing to do. And there's a 5-volt input pin. And if you put 5 volt through there, it basically causes the magnetic relay to complete the circuit, causing the AC 230 volts or whatever it was to go straight through to the lamp or whatever was connected to it. So you would turn the cube, and as you did that, it would send a Bluetooth signal to the device that has the relay, which would basically, flip the current on and off the AC. And yeah, this was a very dangerous project, but it was very rewarding and fun. I really enjoyed that project. So I completed my dissertation in year 3. I decided 2 years before that I was going to write a compiler. So I planned the whole thing. I wanted everything planned properly. And I developed a C-like compiler, which could compile Craft language, which was basically a really, really basic version of C that misses a lot of the essential rules. And I'll put a link to the dissertation description. You can learn about compilers if you want to read that. Bear in mind, that was my first compiler, and I have learned a lot more since then. And I've made other languages since then. So that dissertation was a fantastic experience for me. I spent a year making it. I spent a year writing that compiler just for the fun of it. I really enjoyed that project. And anyway, I had a first class for that dissertation, and it was incredibly fun to build that. I learned so much about parsing. To make a compiler from scratch using no frameworks. You have to know machine code. You have to know assembly. You have to know parsing. You have to know binary compatibility. There's a lot to know to be able to build a compiler from scratch using no third-party libraries. That was the rule, no third-party libraries, because I wanted to learn as much as I could. And I completed it, and it worked quite well. It worked very well. I made a snake game in this language of my own, and it could compile to MS-DOS, basically, COM files, 16-bit assembly. Well, no, 16-bit machine code, I should say, with no header, so there was no P file format or anything. It's just flat binary files. So yeah, after university, I had a couple programming jobs in web development. One programming job in web development. And then I went straight to a senior position in kernel development for the Linux kernel, which was for a company that developed encryption drivers for Disney, HBO, things like that. And that was an incredibly fun experience. I learned so much about the Linux kernel, a lot more than I knew before. And, you know, when you're working with the Linux kernel, there's so little documentation that you're kind of forced to go into the kernel code on GitHub and just try and figure things out, you know what I mean? Because all the articles you find, they're like 10, 20 years out of date, you know, it can be quite difficult to find what you're looking for. They're like from 2003 and things like that, you know, a lot of the articles, 2004, things like that. So developing the Linux kernel can be very difficult for that reason. I do have a course on Linux kernel development, and you'll notice I don't teach more than a hello world module. Than a character device module, sorry. And the reason for that is because the kernel's changing all the time. When you compile your kernel code, it'll compile for one particular version. And if there's even a minor version change, it won't compile. So that's why I can't teach more than that in my Linux kernel development course, because the Linux kernel changes so much. You know, I mean, like, there would be people running into problems because they're on different kernel versions, and that's the reason I don't go further on that course. But if you are interested in that course, it's in the description if you want to learn the basics of Linux kernel development. So anyway, after that Linux kernel job, I decided I wanted to teach online. Well, you know, do contracting and stuff. So I did some contracting, and then I realized some course I made 2 years ago, my C++ programming course, was getting a little bit of attention. So I decided to make more courses, you know, and eventually I turned that into my full-time job. It took a while. So now I just try to teach everybody what I know. And yeah, a lot to do with programming is problem solving. That's 99% of the problem, or maybe 90% of the problem. And the rest is just the code. You know, the problem solving comes first, you know. You know, why shouldn't you cross the road if the light is red? You know, you think about the problem and then you write the code. That's how it works. That's how it should work, you know. And also, if you notice problems in your design, rewrite the whole thing. It's not worth sloppy code. It'll come back to bite you, I'm telling you. You know, I've written bad code. Everyone writes bad code. If you look back at your code a year from now, you'll think, oh no, I should have done that a bit differently. That's completely normal. But it's very important when you recognize these things, you fix it, because that's the only way you improve, right? And a good design is so important. So I advise any of you looking to learn programming at a low level to start with the C programming language and then learn x86 assembly language. Once you've learned those two, it'll really push the ball forward for you guys to learn kernel development and a lot of other low-level technologies and disciplines. So I have a couple courses in the description, including one on kernel development that you might like. So if you have any questions or want to know more, please let me know.